There are moments when your entire life pivots on a single sentence. When everything ordinary becomes extraordinary in the space between one heartbeat and the next. I didn't know that night would be one of them, but maybe some part of me had been waiting for it all along. The television cast its familiar blue glow across Adrian's living room, painting everything in muted shades of gray and silver. The movie had been playing for 30 minutes, maybe more, but neither of us had been watching. Not really. I could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air between us like smoke, thick and impossible to ignore. I sat forward on the sectional couch, elbows resting on my knees, hands clasped together as if prayer could steady the restlessness building in my chest. Adrian sat beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with something distinctly him. His arm was draped over the back of the couch, fingertips just barely brushing the fabric of my shirt. It was casual, the kind of gesture old friends make without thinking. But it didn't feel casual. Nothing about this evening felt casual, though I couldn't name exactly why. The apartment was Adrian's, but felt temporary in the way all his spaces did. Boxes still unpacked in corners, furniture that looked borrowed from someone else's life. He'd been back in town for 4 months now, after his relationship with Sarah ended, and he decided he needed a fresh start somewhere familiar. He'd reached out to me like no time had passed, like we were still 22 and inseparable instead of 30-something men who had learned how to hide parts of themselves so well we sometimes forgot they existed. On screen, 2 actors were locked in an embrace, their faces illuminated by what was meant to be moonlight but was obviously stage lighting. The kiss lingered longer than necessary, the camera holding on them with an intimacy that felt intrusive. I shifted uncomfortably, suddenly hyper-aware of every sound in the room. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant murmur of traffic through the windows, my own breathing, which seemed too loud. I felt Adrian turn slightly toward me, and my pulse quickened. There was something in the air, a charge I recognized but had trained myself to ignore for so many years I'd almost convinced myself it was imaginary. Almost. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. So quiet I might have missed it if the entire world hadn't suddenly narrowed to this couch, this moment, this question that would change everything. "Can I kiss you?" The words didn't echo. They didn't fade. They hung suspended in the space between us, demanding an answer I wasn't sure I knew how to give. My throat closed. My hands went still. Time stretched like taffy, each second feeling both endless and too short. I turned to look at him, slow and careful, as if sudden movement might shatter something fragile. His face was half in shadow, the television light catching the uncertainty in his eyes, the slight parting of his lips as he waited for my response. He looked vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before, stripped of the easy confidence that usually surrounded him like armor. My mind went blank and then flooded all at once. 1,000 thoughts crashed together. How long had I imagined this moment? How many times had I caught myself looking at him too long, wanting something I couldn't name or wouldn't let myself want? And now here he was, asking the question I'd never dared to hope for and never expected to hear. I should have said something. Yes or no or anything at all. But my voice had abandoned me, leaving only the sound of my heart beating so hard I was certain he could hear it. Instead, I just stared at him, and in that staring, something passed between us. Recognition, maybe, or permission, or just the acknowledgement that we had both been pretending this electricity didn't exist for far too long. His eyes searched mine, looking for something I wasn't sure I was brave enough to give. Behind him, the movie continued, oblivious to the fact that my entire world had just tilted on its axis. The actors on screen were talking now, their voices meaningless background noise to the roar of possibility and terror filling my head. I thought about all the careful walls I'd built over the years, all the ways I'd learned to be safe, to be appropriate, to be the kind of person who didn't complicate things or make anyone uncomfortable, including myself. I thought about the part of me I'd kept locked away so tightly that sometimes I forgot it existed at all. But I couldn't forget it now. Not with Adrian looking at me like that, like he was seeing something in me that I'd never let anyone see before. Not with his question hanging between us, patient and dangerous and full of promise. The silence stretched on, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything we'd never said, all the moments when our hands had lingered a little too long passing coffee cups, all the times I'd caught him looking at me with an expression I couldn't read, all the nights I'd gone home and wondered what would happen if I were brave enough to stop pretending I didn't want what I wanted. I realized then that this wasn't really about a kiss. It was about acknowledgement, about stepping out of the shadows we'd both been hiding in, even if just for a moment. It was about the risk of being seen and the even greater risk of not being seen at all. My answer wasn't words. It couldn't be. Instead, it was in the way I didn't pull away, didn't laugh it off, didn't pretend I hadn't heard him. It was in the slight nod I wasn't even aware of giving, in the way my breath caught and held, in the fact that I was still looking at him like he was the only thing in the room that mattered. Because he was. And everything changed. I am 32 years old, and I've spent most of those years learning how to be invisible. Not in the dramatic way of someone who hides from the world, but in the quiet way of someone who has mastered the art of being present without being seen. I teach 7th grade English at Roosevelt Middle School, where I am known for my meticulous lesson plans and my ability to make Shakespeare accessible to 12-year-olds who would rather be anywhere else. My colleagues respect me. My students tolerate me. My principal considers me reliable. These are the facts of my life, the safe details I offer when someone asks who I am. But there are also the walls I've built brick by careful brick to keep the complicated parts of myself safely contained. My apartment reflects this same careful curation. It sits on the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian house on Maple Street, narrow and lined with bookshelves that stretch from floor to ceiling. Every weekend, I reorganize my vinyl collection, arranging records by era, then by artist, then by the mood they evoke when I need them most. Saturday mornings find me at the farmer's market, buying vegetables I will cook for one and flowers I will arrange in mason jars. Sunday afternoons, I grade papers at the corner table of Grind Coffee, where the barista knows I take my coffee black and the regulars have learned not to sit in my spot. It is a good life, a quiet life, a life that asks nothing uncomfortable of me and offers nothing unexpected in return. But it is also a life lived at arm's length from myself. And I have become so accustomed to this distance that I sometimes forget there are parts of me that exist beyond the careful boundaries I have drawn. Adrian remembers those parts. Adrian has always remembered them, even when I wished he wouldn't. We met during our sophomore year at State in a Victorian literature seminar, where we were the only 2 students who actually read the assignments. He was studying pre-med then, all sharp ambition and late-night study sessions, but he loved books the way some people love music. Completely, without reservation. We spent hours in the library, debating the motivations of Heathcliff and Catherine, arguing about whether Tess of the D'Urberville deserved her fate. Those were the years when friendship felt like the most important thing in the world. We were inseparable in the way that only college friends can be, when your entire universe consists of dining halls and dorm rooms, and the intoxicating possibility that you might become anyone you wanted to be. Adrian knew me before I learned to edit myself, before I discovered that some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud. Then graduation arrived, and with it the slow drift that happens when life pulls people in different directions. Adrian went to medical school in Chicago. I stayed for graduate school, then found my teaching position in my quiet apartment and my carefully constructed routine. We exchanged Christmas cards for a few years, the occasional email, the birthday text that proved we still thought of each other even as the space between us grew wider. Until 4 months ago, when my phone buzzed with a message that said simply, "I'm moving back. Want to get coffee?" He had changed in the decade since college, but also hadn't. His hair was shorter now, touched with gray at the temples. His hands were steadier, marked by years of emergency medicine and the weight of decisions made in moments when every second mattered. But his laugh was the same, and so was the way he listened with his entire body, leaning forward as if your words were the most important thing he had ever heard. The coffee became dinner. Dinner became weekend trips to bookstores and record shops, long walks through neighborhoods we had never explored together. He told me about Sarah, about the 5 years they had spent trying to build something that never quite fit, about the relief and guilt that came with finally admitting it was over. I told him about my teaching, about the satisfaction of watching students discover they could love something they thought they hated. We did not talk about the deeper things. We did not acknowledge the way conversations seemed to circle around spaces we could not name. We did not mention the careful distance I had learned to maintain from everyone, or the way he seemed to recognize it and refuse to honor it. Instead, we fell back into the easy rhythm of friendship, as if the years between college and now had been nothing more than a long intermission. Movie nights became routine. Thursday dinners at the Thai place on Morrison Street. Text conversations that stretched late into the night, full of shared articles and inside jokes, and the comfortable intimacy of people who had known each other when knowing someone meant everything. But there were moments when the careful boundaries I had built felt less solid than I needed them to be. When Adrian would reach across the table to steal food from my plate, his fingers brushing mine. When he would fall asleep during movies, his head tilting toward my shoulder with unconscious trust. When he would look at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something that felt like recognition mixed with a question I wasn't ready to answer. I told myself these moments were imaginary, the product of a loneliness I had grown too comfortable carrying. I told myself that Adrian was simply Adrian, warm and tactile and incapable of maintaining the distance that had become second nature to me. I told myself that the electricity I felt in those moments was one-sided, a product of feelings I had buried so deeply I sometimes forgot they existed. Until tonight, until his question shattered every careful lie I had constructed, and I realized that some truths cannot be buried forever. Some truths wait, patient and persistent, until the moment you can no longer pretend they don't exist. And now, sitting here with his question hanging between us, I understand that the life I have built, safe and predictable as it is, has never been the whole story. It has only been the story I was brave enough to tell. The silence after his question stretches on for what feels like hours, but must be only seconds. My heart hammers against my ribs so loudly I'm certain he can hear it. I open my mouth to say something, anything, but no words come. Instead, I just stare at him, and in that staring, something passes between us that feels too large for the room to contain. Adrian's face changes. The vulnerability I saw there moments before shifts to something that looks like regret, maybe even embarrassment. He pulls back slightly, not physically, but in some other way, as if he's trying to take the question back, to stuff it back inside where it came from. Forget I said anything, he murmurs, his voice barely audible above the sound of the movie we've both forgotten. He turns toward the television, but I can see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands have gone still on his lap. But I can't forget. Even as he tries to pretend the moment never happened, those 4 words have rewritten something fundamental in the air between us. Can I kiss you? They echo in my mind, not fading but growing stronger, more insistent, like a song I can't stop hearing. I want to tell him that forgetting is impossible. I want to explain that his question has unlocked something I've kept carefully contained for years, decades maybe. Instead, I nod like I understand, like we can simply return to watching a movie neither of us cares about, like words once spoken can be unspoken. We sit there for the rest of the film, but everything has changed. The comfortable familiarity we've cultivated over these past months feels fragile now, like glass that might shatter if we move too quickly. When the credits roll, we both make excuses. Adrian says he has an early shift to the hospital. I mention papers to grade. Neither excuse is untrue, but neither is the real reason we suddenly can't look at each other. I drive home through streets that look exactly the same as they did 2 hours ago, but I feel like I'm seeing them for the first time. The familiar landmarks of my neighborhood seem foreign now, as if Adrian's question has shifted not just the evening, but the entire geography of my life. In my apartment, I stand in front of the bathroom mirror and stare at my reflection. The same face looks back at me that has looked back every morning for 32 years, but something behind my eyes feels different. More awake, maybe, or more afraid. Why can't I just tell him? I whisper to the mirror, but the man looking back has no answers. The days that follow feel like walking through water. Everything takes more effort than it should. Adrian and I text less frequently. Our conversations reduce to the safe territory of work schedules and weather reports. When he does call, there's a careful quality to his voice, as if he's monitoring every word before it leaves his mouth. I find myself analyzing every interaction we've had over the past months, looking for signs I might have missed. The way he always sits just slightly closer than necessary. How he touches my arm when he laughs. His hand lingering a beat longer than casual contact requires. The fact that he never mentions dating anyone, even though Sarah has been gone for over a year now. At school, my students notice my distraction. During a discussion of Romeo and Juliet, Sarah Chin asks why the balcony scene is considered romantic when it's really just two people who barely know each other making impulsive decisions. I start to give my usual answer about the power of first love, but the words feel hollow in my mouth. Instead, I hear myself saying that sometimes people recognize something in each other that they can't name, something that feels like coming home to a place they've never been. The class stares at me like I've spoken in a foreign language. Maybe I have. A week passes, then another. Adrian invites me over for another movie night, and despite every instinct telling me to decline, I find myself saying yes. Because the alternative is losing him entirely, and that feels worse than this awkward dance we've been performing. His apartment looks the same, but we both move through it differently now. More carefully. He offers me a beer, and when our fingers brush as he hands it to me, we both pull back as if we've touched something electric. We choose a comedy this time, something safe and mindless that requires no emotional investment. But halfway through, I excuse myself to use the bathroom, not because I need to, but because I need a moment to breathe, to think, to figure out how to exist in the same space as someone who has asked me the question I've been afraid to ask myself for years. In his bathroom, I splash cold water on my face and stare at my reflection in his medicine cabinet mirror. The fluorescent light is harsh, unforgiving. It shows every line around my eyes, every place where time and careful living have left their mark. When I return to the living room, Adrian appears to be asleep on the couch, his head tilted back against the cushions, his breathing deep and even. But there's something about his stillness that seems too perfect, too intentional. Like he's pretending to sleep to avoid the weight of being awake together in this space where unspoken things live. I stand there watching him for a long moment, studying the softness of his expression in sleep, the way the tension he's been carrying all week has finally left his face. In this moment, he looks younger, more like the Adrian I knew in college, before life taught us both to be so careful with our hearts. And I realize something that stops my breath entirely. Something has shifted permanently between us, and no amount of pretending otherwise will change that fact. The question he asked has opened a door that cannot be closed, revealed a truth that cannot be unknown. I want to reach out and touch his face, to tell him that his question wasn't unwelcome, just terrifying. Instead, I gather my things quietly and let myself out, driving home through the dark with the weight of everything unsaid pressing against my chest like a stone. Over the next several weeks, we orbit each other like binary stars, caught in a gravitational pull neither of us fully understands. The careful distance we tried to maintain after that night dissolved slowly, replaced by something more complex, more charged. We text again, call again, fall back into our routines, but everything carries a different weight now. I begin to notice things I had trained myself not to see. The way Adrian's hand finds the small of my back when we navigate through crowded spaces, his palm warm through the fabric of my shirt, lingering just a moment longer than necessary. How he stands closer when we're looking at something together, his shoulder brushing mine as we examine records at the vintage shop on 5th Street or read menus posted in restaurant windows. These touches feel both accidental and deliberate, as if he's testing boundaries neither of us has explicitly drawn. Each contact sends electricity through my skin, a current I'm afraid to acknowledge but can no longer ignore. I start journaling again for the first time since college, pulling out a leather-bound notebook I bought years ago but never used. Late at night, after grading papers and lesson planning, I find myself writing in fragments that never quite become complete thoughts. Words about courage scattered across pages like seeds. Paragraphs about loneliness that start strong but fade into ellipses when they get too close to the truth. I write about the way Adrian laughs when he's tired, how it's different from his daytime laugh, softer and more unguarded. I write about the questions I'm afraid to ask and the answers I'm even more afraid to receive. The pages fill with half-formed revelations and observations I can't share with anyone, least of all myself. My other friendships begin to feel hollow by comparison. When my colleague Janet invites me to happy hour with the other teachers, I make excuses. When my neighbor asks if I want to join his weekend hiking group, I decline. It's not that I'm avoiding them exactly, but I can't explain this internal shift without revealing too much, and I'm not ready for those conversations. Not yet. How do you tell people that you're discovering parts of yourself you forgot existed? How do you explain that friendship has become something both more and less than what you thought it was? Adrian is changing too, in ways I notice but don't fully understand. He's quieter during our dinners together, more prone to long silences where he stares at something I can't see. Sometimes I catch him looking at me with an expression that seems like he's trying to solve a puzzle, his brow furrowed in concentration. One evening, as we're cleaning up after takeout Chinese food in his kitchen, he asks about my dating life. The question comes out of nowhere, casual in tone, but weighted with something I can't identify. Anyone interesting lately? He says, not looking at me as he rinses plates in the sink. The question catches me off guard. We've never talked about dating, not really, not beyond the occasional mention of past relationships that ended years ago. I lie, telling him there's nothing to talk about, because the truth is too complicated to explain. How do I tell him that dating has always felt like performing a role I was never quite right for? That I've spent so many years convincing myself I was content with solitude that I stopped looking for anything else. No one special, I say, which is both true and false in ways that make my chest tight. Adrian nods, but something shifts in his face, a flicker of disappointment he tries to mask by turning back to the dishes. The silence that follows feels loaded with everything we're not saying. We decide to take the weekend trip we've been talking about for months, renting a small cabin by Lake Morrison 2 hours north of town. It's something we joked about during college, back when weekend getaways felt like the height of adult sophistication. Now, packing my bag for 2 days away from the careful routines of our separate lives, it feels like something else entirely, like a test neither of us is prepared for. The cabin is smaller than the photos suggested, with thin walls and a single main room dominated by a stone fireplace. We claim separate bedrooms, but the proximity feels intentional, as if the space itself is pushing us toward conversations we've been avoiding. That first night, we build a fire and sit in the living room with beers and a deck of cards, playing games we learned in college dorm rooms. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and outside, the lake laps against the shore with a rhythm that feels like breathing. Adrian wins 3 hands of poker in a row, grinning with the competitive satisfaction I remember from our study sessions years ago. But when we're cleaning up the cards, his expression grows serious again. I didn't mean to mess things up, he says softly, not looking at me, his voice barely audible above the crackling fire. I know he's talking about that night, about the question that changed everything between us. My throat tightens and I stare into the flames, watching them consume the wood with patient determination. You didn't, I tell him, but we both know it's only half true. The fire burns lower, and neither of us moves to add more wood. In the growing dimness, the space between us on the couch feels both too wide and not wide enough. I can hear him breathing, can feel the weight of all the words we're not saying. Later, lying in a narrow cabin bed, listening to the sounds of Adrian moving around in the next room, I realize that this weekend isn't about escape at all. It's about reckoning with the truth that we can't go back to who we were before that question was asked. The only choice now is whether we move forward or remain suspended in this space between friendship and something we're both too afraid to name. Back home, the cabin weekend lingers in my thoughts like smoke. I replay that moment by the fire over and over. The way Adrian's voice broke slightly when he said he didn't want to mess things up. the way the flames cast shadows across his face as he spoke. I told him he hadn't messed anything up, but that was only half the truth. The other half was too dangerous to speak aloud. Days pass, then a week, and I can't stop thinking about his question. Can I kiss you? It follows me everywhere now, echoing in my classroom as I teach Dickinson's poems about desire disguised as nature imagery, haunting my grocery store trips where I find myself buying coffee for two without thinking. The words have taken up residence in my mind, patient and persistent, refusing to be forgotten no matter how hard I try. I begin to understand that this isn't really about a kiss at all. It's about recognition, about seeing and being seen, about the courage to want something openly instead of burying it so deep you convince yourself it was never there. I remember every detail of that moment with crystalline clarity. The tremor in Adrian's voice that suggested the question had surprised him as much as it did me. The way his eyes searched mine, looking for permission or rejection or anything that might help him understand what was happening between us. The pitch of uncertainty that made those four simple words sound like both confession and prayer. One evening, after spending an entire day grading essays about courage and literature, I find myself standing outside Adrian's apartment building. I didn't plan to come here. I was driving home from school, taking my usual route, when my car seemed to turn toward his street of its own accord. Now I'm here, staring up at his third-floor windows, trying to understand what brought me to this moment. The autumn air is crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves. Rush hour traffic hums in the distance, but this residential street feels suspended in quiet, as if the whole neighborhood is holding its breath. I stand there for several minutes, hands deep in my coat pockets, debating whether to go up or drive away and pretend this moment of weakness never happened. Before I can decide, the building's front door opens and Adrian appears, dressed in his paramedic uniform, probably heading to or from shift. He stops short when he sees me, surprise flickering across his face before settling into something warmer. Elias? Everything okay? I realize I have no explanation for being here, no reasonable excuse for standing on a sidewalk like some lost soul. The truth is too raw, too complicated to explain in simple terms. But standing here looking at him, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes, I understand that I'm tired of careful explanations and reasonable excuses. I was just thinking, I say, which is both true and completely inadequate. He waits for me to continue, but when I don't, he simply nods and asks if I want to come up. His apartment is warm, filled with the smell of coffee and something that might be dinner. He offers me tea, and we move through the familiar ritual of preparation. But everything feels different now. More charged, more intentional. We sit in his living room, the same couch where everything changed weeks ago, but we're both more careful about distance now. He curls into one corner while I take the other end, our bodies angled toward each other, but not touching. The space between us feels like a chasm and a bridge at the same time. He tells me about his shift, about a car accident where everyone walked away unharmed despite the twisted metal and shattered glass. I tell him about my students' essays, how they write about bravery like it's something that only exists in books and movies, never in their own lives. We talk around the edges of larger truths, circling closer to something neither of us knows how to name. The conversation fades into comfortable silence, and in that quiet space, I feel the weight of all the words I've been carrying. They press against my chest like stones, demanding release. You asked if you could kiss me, I say, the words tumbling out too fast, too raw. And I wanted to say yes. The admission hangs in the air between us, stark and undeniable. Adrian goes very still, his tea mug frozen halfway to his lips. For a moment, I think I've made a terrible mistake, that I've misread everything and ruined whatever fragile thing we've been building. Then he sets down his mug and looks at me with an expression I've never seen before. Something that looks like relief mixed with terror, mixed with hope. He stands up slowly, as if sudden movement might shatter the moment, takes a step toward me, then another, until he's close enough that I can see the pulse beating at his throat, can smell his cologne mixed with something distinctly him. He reaches out, his hand hovering near my face, but not quite touching, asking permission without words. I lean into his palm, and his fingers brush my jaw with such gentleness that my breath catches. The kiss, when it comes, is nothing like I imagined and everything I never dare to hope for. Brief and trembling, soft and uncertain, like a question finally finding its answer. We pull apart after only a moment, but Adrian's hand stays against my face, his thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone. Neither of us speaks. Words feel unnecessary now, maybe even dangerous. Instead, we stand there in his living room, foreheads nearly touching, breathing the same air, and for the first time in years, I don't feel alone in my own skin. The silence stretches between us, but it's not empty. It's full of recognition, of acknowledgement, of the quiet understanding that something fundamental has shifted. We've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed, opened a door that can't be closed. And in this moment, that feels like everything. After that night, we don't speak of what happened for 3 days. Not because we're avoiding it, exactly, but because naming it feels dangerous, like trying to capture smoke in our hands. Instead, we exist in a space between friendship and something we can't yet define, finding each other in moments that feel both accidental and inevitable. I discover Adrian at the grocery store on Thursday evening, standing in the produce section with a basket containing only coffee and bread. Our eyes meet across a display of autumn apples, and something passes between us that makes the fluorescent-lit space feel intimate. We don't plan to shop together, but we fall in a step anyway, moving through the aisles with a new awareness of each other's proximity. When our hands brush reaching for the same container of yogurt, neither of us pulls away immediately. The contact lasts only seconds, but it carries the weight of acknowledgement, of permission quietly granted. Saturday finds us in his car, driving to nowhere in particular with the windows down and music playing softly between us. We end up parked at the overlook above the city, watching the lights begin to flicker on as dusk settles over the valley. Adrian's hand rests on the console between us, and after several minutes of careful consideration, I reach out and thread our fingers together. He doesn't pull away. Instead, his thumb traces small circles against my palm, and we sit there in comfortable silence, watching the world transform from day to night while something similar happens between us. We don't label it. We don't tell anyone. But we keep finding each other in quiet corners of our lives, in moments stolen between the ordinary routines that have suddenly become extraordinary. Still, I can see Adrian wrestling with something larger than the simple fact of our connection. During our Tuesday dinner at the Thai place, he grows quiet halfway through his pad thai, staring at his food like it might contain answers to questions he hasn't learned to ask yet. "I've never been with a man," he says finally, the words coming out in a rush, as if he's been holding them back and they've finally broken free. The admission hangs between us, vulnerable and honest. I set down my chopsticks and wait for him to continue, recognizing the courage it took to speak those words aloud. "I don't know what that means," he continues, his voice quieter now. "About me, about who I am, about what people will think. Sarah and I were together for 5 years. Everyone expected us to get married. Hell, expected us to get married." He looks up at me then, and I see the confusion in his eyes, the fear of disappointing people who have expectations about his life that no longer fit the reality of what he's feeling. "I'm not asking you to know everything," I tell him, echoing conversations I've had with myself over years of careful self-discovery. "Just don't run." The words feel inadequate even as I speak them, but they're the best I can offer. I know what it's like to carry shame like an extra limb, to feel the weight of other people's assumptions about who you're supposed to be. I know the exhaustion that comes from performing a version of yourself that feels increasingly foreign with each passing day. Adrian nods slowly, something loosening in his shoulders. It's not a promise, exactly, but it's not a rejection either. It's an acknowledgement that some things can't be rushed, that understanding takes time and patience and the courage to sit with uncertainty. "Okay," he whispers, and that single word carries more weight than any elaborate declaration could. The conversation shifts to safer territory after that, but something has been established between us. A boundary crossed, a truth acknowledged. We're no longer pretending. This is simple friendship that occasionally involves hand-holding and careful kisses stolen in grocery store parking lots. Later that week, Adrian mentions his family for the first time since we reconnected. His parents, who live 2 states away, and call every Sunday to check on his life and ask about his love life with the persistence of people who believe their concern is welcome. His sister, who still asks about Sarah and can't understand why such a nice girl couldn't make her brother happy. I don't know how to explain this to them. He says one evening as we walk through the park near my apartment. We've fallen into the habit of evening walks, partly for the exercise, but mostly for the excuse to be alone together without the weight of walls and furniture and all the domestic implications they carry. Maybe you don't have to, I suggest. Not yet, anyway. But even as I say it, I know it's not that simple. Adrian is someone who has always lived his life in the open, who doesn't know how to maintain the careful compartments I've learned to navigate. For him, this secrecy feels like shame, even when it's really just self-preservation. I don't want to hurt you, he says suddenly, stopping on the path and turning to face me. But I don't know what I'm doing. The honesty in his voice breaks something open in my chest. I want to tell him that hurt is always a risk when you care about someone, that uncertainty is part of the territory when you're brave enough to want something real. Instead, I reach for his hand in the gathering darkness and hold it like an anchor. You're not hurting me, I say, which is true in this moment, but might not always be. We're figuring it out as we go. It's not perfect. It's not easy. The questions Adrian carries about identity and family and the future press against us like weather, unpredictable and sometimes harsh. But it's honest, and honesty feels like the only solid ground we have to stand on. That night, walking back to my apartment with Adrian's hand warm in mine, I realized that some relationships can't be defined by the words we use for other people's love stories. Sometimes you have to create new language, write your own definitions, trust that what you're building together is real even when it doesn't match anyone else's expectations. And for now, that's enough. 3 weeks later, we find ourselves back on Adrian's couch, but everything has changed. The worn sectional that once held the weight of unspoken questions now cradles something quieter, more certain. A different movie plays on the screen, though neither of us pretends to care about the plot. The blue glow still washes across the room in familiar patterns, but the tension that once made the air feel electric has transformed into something deeper, more sustainable. Adrian sits with his back against the arm of the couch, legs stretched out, and I rest against his side with his arm around my shoulders. It's a simple configuration, the kind couples manage without thinking, but for us it represents months of careful navigation, of learning to trust that wanting something doesn't automatically mean losing it. His fingers trace absent patterns on my shoulder through my shirt, and I can feel the steady rhythm of his breathing beneath my cheek. These small intimacies still carry wonder for me, the miracle of being allowed this close to another person's quiet moments. The movie reaches some predictable climax involving car chases and explosions, but we remain focused on more important things. The way Adrian's hand settles naturally in mine, how our breathing has synchronized without conscious effort. The fact that silence between us no longer feels loaded with everything we're afraid to say. We've learned a new language over these past weeks, built from stolen glances and coffee shared in the morning light of his kitchen, from the weight of his hand on my back as we navigate crowded spaces, from conversations that stretch late into the night about books and work and the small revelations that come with really knowing someone. I still teach 7th grade English. Adrian still saves lives in the back of ambulances. But these public selves feel less separate from who we are together now, less like performances we have to maintain and more like natural extensions of something real. We haven't told anyone yet, but the secrecy doesn't feel like shame anymore. It feels like protection, like tending something fragile until it grows strong enough to withstand other people's questions and expectations. Adrian's family still calls on Sundays, and he still deflects their inquiries about his love life. But the deflection comes easier now. He's learning that some truths belong to you first before they belong to anyone else. Last Thursday, he mentioned showing me the trail behind his childhood home the next time we visit his parents. Not this visit or next visit, but someday when we're ready. The casual way he said it, like our future together was something he could take for granted, made my chest tight with gratitude. I've started calling in sick less frequently on Mondays, stopped making excuses to avoid faculty gatherings, begun responding to my neighbors' invitations with actual enthusiasm instead of polite deferrals. It's as if having one honest relationship has made all my other relationships feel more possible, less like obligations I have to carefully manage. The changes are small, but significant. Adrian keeps a toothbrush in my bathroom now, and I have a key to his apartment. We grocery shop together without planning it, our separate lists somehow becoming shared decisions about what we want to cook and eat and discover together. These domestic details might seem mundane to other people, but for us they represent a kind of revolution. On screen, the movie reaches its resolution with the kind of neat ending that rarely exists in real life. The hero gets the girl, the villain is defeated, everyone learns something important about themselves in exactly 90 minutes. We watch the credits roll with amused detachment, both of us understanding that our own story doesn't follow such tidy narrative arcs. As the screen fades to black, Adrian reaches for the remote and turns off the television, plunging the room into the softer darkness of evening. Streetlights filter through his windows, casting everything in amber and shadow. He shifts slightly, turning to look at me in the dim light. The question he asked weeks ago doesn't need repeating now. It's already been answered in 1,000 small ways, in moments of permission granted and trust earned, in a simple fact that we're here together, no longer afraid to want what we want. He leans down and kisses my temple, a gesture so natural and unguarded that it takes my breath away. Not because it's passionate or dramatic, but because it's easy. Because it comes from a place of certainty rather than question, of comfort rather than desperation. I think about the version of myself who sat on this same couch months ago, paralyzed by a simple question, terrified of wanting too much or not enough. That man feels like a stranger now, someone I knew once, but have outgrown. Not because falling in love erased all the careful walls I built, but because it gave me reasons to lower them voluntarily, brick by careful brick. We don't talk about the future in grand terms. We don't make promises we can't keep or declarations that feel too large for the quiet thing we're building. But when Adrian asks if I want to stay the night, the question carries no weight beyond its simple meaning. Not because it doesn't matter, but because it matters in the right way now. Yes, I tell him, and the word feels like coming home to a place I didn't know I'd been looking for. Outside, the world continues its complicated business of existing. But inside this small apartment, on this familiar couch, two men who have learned to be honest about what they want sit together in comfortable darkness, and for the first time in either of our lives, we don't feel like we're waiting for something to begin. It already has.